Hello and welcome to the Mac Gamecast episode 34. I am Jon Carr as always, and with me today is Casper. How are you, sir?
Hey, doing pretty good. Happy to have another episode on its legs.
Yes, very happy to have you on. Unfortunately, our other members are unavailable due to busy schedules. Lily, Ted, Sam's been out a while. Maybe we can snag them later. But today, and really the next few episodes of the show, unless something groundbreaking happens in the tech game world.
I'm
Go
sorry
ahead.
for already intervening here.
Oh,
But
please.
speaking of groundbreaking, it's not like massive yet, but WWDC has been announced for June 5th. Just putting that out there.
Ooh, that's
So June 5th
nice.
through June 9th, I think that fits with the schedule. But yeah, just wanted to put that out there. We don't know anything yet, of course, but I just wanted to say that it's announced.
Diablo 4 and launching June 6th. Coincidence?
Probably.
I think not. Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah.
That would be wild if they're like, and by the way, they just got to pull a Steve Jobs and one more thing.
Yeah.
Ta-da! Here's Diablo 4 on the Mac. Yeah, that'd be cool.
One more thing, 100 Mac games. No, not happening.
Yeah. No, thank you for that interruption. That's a good interruption because there's definitely going to be a one or two shows dedicated just to that when it comes out and we listen and see what's going on.
Yep.
So for the next few shows, what we're going to be doing is our best games of all time across the staff. As much as possible, of course, we would all get on the show, but as schedule allows, it could just be two of us kind of bouncing around. So the format is top 10 or top 15. We're not going to number them like, oh, this is my number one, this is my number five. I set no date criterion. It could be from 80s, it could be Pong, whatever. It could be anything. Any game you've played, the most memorable, most exciting. It's not like length of game played. I have games I've put thousands of hours into and they're not on my list.
Right. Same.
So, I mean, one or two of them made an honorable mention, but yeah, something that was either a memorable experience, could be single player, could be multiplayer, co-op, anything like that. Just the best games subjectively for us, and then we're going to talk about why.
Yeah.
And maybe throw out a couple details for their historical record on developer or publisher, or maybe when we played it versus when it was released or something like that. And Casper is going to be awesome and start us off with one of his favorite games of all time, and I don't know what it is, so I'm excited.
Ooh, excitement.
Yes.
So yeah, as mentioned, it's not going to be like an ordered list. So this, just because it's starting out, I'm not saying it's necessarily the number one. It's just the one that happens to be first on my top games list. But we're going to be talking about The Longest Journey, which in my opinion is not just a fantastic game, but a fantastic series of games. Now I will say, on my list, I have a few cases where I'm picking a game out of a series. I've sort of made like the rule on my list that if I bring up something that's part of a series, I'll only bring it up once, even though you can say like the entire series is my favorite of whatever, and like maybe several games. But so for The Longest Journey, I'm gonna be mostly focusing on the first game in the series, but because I do really think it's the very best of them. I do recommend people play all three in the series because it's a very narrative heavy game, and the whole point of it is the story. They all tie nicely together, and it's, in our real world, the release dates are spread out so wide that it's like it spans like 20 years of storytelling effectively, right? But it's a great experience. I can recommend everyone play it, but really the first one also works well as an isolated experience, and it's an excellent game. So that aside, The Longest Journey is made by, or published by at least, Funcom. And the main people, or at least one of the main people, Ragnar Tjörnqvist, behind the game, has since started his own company, Red Thread Games. And they self-published the last entry in the game, or in the series of games, which is Dreamfall Chapters. The second game being Dreamfall, The Longest Journey.
Right.
Dreamfall Chapters saw a native Mac release. The others did not, which for a story-focused game where all of the games are a continuation upon each other, a bit annoying that you only get the last one as a native Mac version. But I will say the others, they're old enough that you can play them through parallels or whatever without issue. Though there are some tweaks that you'll have to do to an INI file to get the first one working properly on modern hardware. That also includes native Windows.
Right.
About the game itself, it's a point-and-click adventure game. And I think in general, I'm not necessarily a major fan of point and click adventure games. So funnily enough, see that I have quite a few games that are sort of similar in style, not necessarily point and click, but that sort of adventure vibe on my list. But I think The Longest Journey excels in telling a good story, focusing on a character named April Ryan, who can shift between worlds. Stark, which is effectively the world we know, the world of science and technology, and the world of magic, which is Arcadia. And with this power of shifting between worlds, um, well, she has a lot of importance in the battle of the balance, which is like keeping the two realms, um, well, yeah, balanced, I guess. And then there's reasons why you would want them to not be merged together and kept separate, with a lot of interesting intrigue along the way. Very, very excellent characters throughout that are super memorable. Like, to this day, the game came out like late 90s, I think 99-ish, maybe the year 2000, something like that. To this day, thinking about like the parts of the end where April starts thinking about her experiences, and we get more into like the character of her, it almost brings tears to my eyes. It's that significant an experience to me.
Nice.
And I cried when I initially played it as well, during the ending. And there's also just fun in it, you know. One thing is telling an emotional story, but another thing is games that just inject pure humor in a nice way. And I think that's kind of rare in video games, to have something that's just genuinely funny. But characters like Crow, which is a talking crow, brilliant.
Nice.
I mean, I love Crow. A lot of fun with Crow. And there's like these. They call them the little ones that sing to the soil. Beautiful character design. They're like little moles, but calling them mole people in universe is sort of almost a racial slur against them.
uh,
Um, but they have like fantastic names that are just super fun to say. Like, I can't even begin to. They're super long. But the little one just refers to himself as Ben Bandu, and his full name translates to the little one who tries hard to live up to his father who sang to the soil. That's
wow.
just beautiful. But yeah, it's a aesthetically super pleasing game, really fun story, really just emotional story. The one criticism I'll give, which, if this is a big turn off to you, maybe the game's not to you, to your liking, is that, as with a lot of point and click adventure games of its time, some of the puzzles are just, you're never gonna figure them out if you're just sitting there like trying to be logical about it. You're either gonna just click on everything until it works or look up a guide.
Right.
I don't think it's that big a deal, because I'm not playing that game for challenge. I'm playing it for story, dialogue options, just
Yes.
experiencing the world. But that is the one downside it has. But I personally find it fantastic regardless. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, has there been a point and click adventure game that doesn't have at least one like really obtuse puzzle? I mean,
I
maybe
don't
there
know.
has, like
Yeah.
the classic ones at least.
Yeah.
I believe there's been some like quote unquote lighter
Mm-hmm.
ones made, like meant to be super casual, and maybe those are all more obvious or something. But typically, any of these adventure games with, especially something that's story heavy, lore heavy, like world building detail heavy,
Mm-hmm.
there's probably something like lost in the weeds, so to speak, and you just stumble on it or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Like you said, look up a guide. I remember doing
Like
that.
the one example from The Longest Journey that I just can think of that's just ridiculous, out of this world, is, for no reason at all, you fish up a rubber duck from like um, a lake or whatever, and then you puncture it. You put a breadstick through it, and you get something that can like remotely inflate it. I forget what that is. Um, and then you use that as like a fishing hook type thing to fish some keys or something from train tracks.
Wow.
There's, there's no sensible person who would do that, but that's the solution to that puzzle.
Right. That is pretty outrageous. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're not wrong. You're not wrong. No, cool game. There's several times, like 10 odd years ago, I almost bought Dreamfall, The Longest
Mm,
Journey, or Dreamfall Chapters, whatever the one had the Mac support. It
mm.
was on my wish list multiple times. I think it was even in my cart or checkout at one point, but I never quite pulled the trigger on it. I can't quite recall why now, probably because I was always busy playing too many other things, but I've always heard good things about the game and the
Yeah,
series
so
in
I
general.
cannot recommend at all playing Dreamfall chapters if you haven't played the entire series. For one thing, it just doesn't stand on its own legs very well. It requires knowledge of all the characters you meet throughout it to really understand what's going on.
Right,
And for another thing, it's definitely hampered by being made by the then just started indie development company of Ragnar Chungfist. He was behind all the other games. He was the lead writer and lead producer and stuff. But Dreamfall's chapters he made having just started his own indie development company, not with a big publisher. And the like, you can tell it has its
right,
issues. It didn't
right,
have a budget like the others did. It's noticeable, and it's for the fans of the series more so than a game that I think is necessarily that good on its own. The studio has
right.
since made another game similar in style, narrative heavy. Um, I think if I remember, yeah, that was first person, but still like an adventure game, not like action or anything. Called Draugen.
Uh,
It's a significantly shorter experience, but it is a lot tighter and more well produced, and that's actually really good on its own.
Interesting. I didn't know. I know we were talking about that in Discord a bit ago. I didn't realize it was
Mhm.
the same people. Cool.
Yeah, they are awesome. And something that's actually kind of funny about Draugen is that the developers are Norwegian. I'm Danish, and there's a lot
Right.
of Norwegian text in the game because it actually takes place in Norway. As a Danish person, I can read the Norwegian bit because the languages are similar enough.
Nice.
And it's like eventually the characters can figure out what it says as well, but the characters like learning Norwegian, not that good at it. So it's like
That's funny.
I'm like 10 steps ahead of the character, and it's like, holy shit, that like lettering says child murderer and blood or something, and the character's just hold on, what does that say? Oh my god! And I'm like, I know.
That's
That's
actually really interesting, and
yeah.
that's like an aspect I don't consider because I only play games in English. I
Hmm.
mean, that's not entirely true. At least in writing.
Hmm.
There's a few I played, like the old Stalker games. I did play in, I think it was Ukrainian.
Yeah.
And with like English subtitles, I would do that. And there,
Hmm.
I can't think of another game or series. I think it was just that one.
Hmm.
Of course, I have no idea how to speak or read Ukrainian or Russian or anything, but I like the authenticity of the immersion
Yeah.
in the world, so I would do that. But that's funny. Um, so I'm gonna hop on a game.
Sure.
Well, not literally hop on a game. I'm gonna hop on talking about a game. Bye. I'm off to play. Um, although I wish I could play this game right now because it's going to be Max Payne, the original
Mm.
from Remedy, I believe, released in 1999 or around there, unless it was 2001. It was around there, give or
Yeah,
take a
it's
year.
around there. Yeah.
And there was a Mac port, although I don't recall who did it, honestly.
Mm.
Like, was it Macsoft or
I have
someone or the
no
other?
idea.
In any case, there used to be a Mac version. There isn't now. It is a trilogy of games. Ultimately, I have played them all. Number 2 is never on the Mac, although I don't think it was very good. Number 3 was on the Mac, though not made by Remedy. It was made
And it
by
was horrible.
Rockstar. I liked a couple set pieces from the game, but otherwise it
Oh, I didn't
was.
mean the game, just the Mac port was horrible.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It was. It actually deleted all my saves halfway through,
Yep.
and I was like, I had hair then, so I was actually pulling on it. I don't have hair now, but yeah, Max Payne. Really. Uh, I was probably too young to play the game. Realistically, I was like 14 or 15, at least by the ratings. Although at that point I'd played plenty of violent things, but I didn't have my own money then. I mean, I had my own money, but not like a credit card. I did work for my father and this and that, so I actually had money to buy games and this and that. Like I'd have to save up, but anyway, this is going somewhere. So I remember going downstairs and I'd like made up a scheme to basically trick my mother into like letting me buy the game, which isn't very nice of me now that I'm thinking about it. But 14 or whatever year old me thought it was perfectly all right. So I like went downstairs and from my room, and she was like reading, I don't know, a magazine or something. And I like sat in the chair and kind of like, I don't know, I fidgeted a bit and I was like, so I'd like to buy a game. I'd been buying games on and off at this point, usually every couple months or something. I bought one. And she's like, okay, what is it? Because she would want to know. And I'm like, well, you play a detective or you play a cop or something. I forget exactly what I said.
Good start.
And it's like a murder mystery. And, you got to shoot a few people along the way. But like, I totally played it down. Of course, you kill like hundreds of people in the game.
Yeah.
And she's like, all right, it sounds a little violent or something, but like, it should be okay. And I'm like, yeah. I think I had cash or gave it to her, borrowed her credit card and ordered it. Might have even been on the phone or something hilarious back then. Ordered a lot of stuff from like OWC, or I think Maxoff had a catalog. Anyway, I somewhat illegally obtained Max Payne. And then some days later, or a week later, it showed up in the mail physically and everything back then. That was always fun.
Mhm.
But I thought it was an incredible game, both narratively, stylistically, action-wise. It used bullet time. A lot of people say it riffed on The Matrix because it released just after it. The developers say, well, they were developing the tech well before The Matrix ever released, and they ever knew of The Matrix. So to them, it was original. And it was, as far as I know, the first shooter to use something like bullet time, or at least third-person shooter. I know Fear and stuff did that later, but I don't remember when it released. Anyway, I was blown away by it, like the whole slow motion thing. And it was all this like moody, wintry night in New York or Brooklyn or wherever it was. And there was all this cool voiceover narration and like hand drawn sort of cartoon panels or painted style. I forget exact comic book style, I guess.
Yeah.
So sure, it's just a game. You could say boil it down. Oh, like shooting dudes in the face isn't what made the game great, at least by itself. It was the setting, the levels, the mood, the atmosphere, Max Payne's like inner pain and turmoil as he's going through this really long night of killing a lot of dudes.
And a lot can be said about presentation, right? The presentation of everything is just really on point.
Yes.
And I forget if it was in the first game or it only started in the second, but they even had like little animations for if you were low on health and you had like movements that
like
were
limp along.
Yeah.
I don't think in the first one you just had a little bar, like a human outline that filled up, and then of course you just pop your painkillers, and you'd be like, that hold the pain off for a while or something. Growl when you took it, and then the bar would boop boop go down. And there'd be a little like crunch crunch sound effect. Hugely, the style of the game. Like the three main factors for me were definitely its presentation style or slash style. The action was actually really fun and challenging, and you had to use bullet time to overcome like multiple enemies and sometimes like dozens at a time or whatever. The story was really compellingly written, with interesting characters and, the femme fatale, I think it was Mona or something, shows up and throws a whole wrench in the gears and helps him and betrays him and helps him and betrays him. And it's like this roller coaster, and it's just well done. And I remember, so I bought it, and then I don't know if I'd finished it or what, but I told my brother about it. Well, shared the same computer, and he checked it out. I remember going to bed. Then the next morning, I'm like, oh, how far did you get? I assumed he beat like a level, and he had stayed up for like 6 hours straight playing it. And it's like, oh, I'm already here. And I'm like, what? That's like halfway or 2/3 of the way through the game or whatever. And so he was also blown away by it. Haha, no pun intended. But yeah, huge fan of Max Payne. I do like the series in general. I did watch the movie with Mark Wahlberg, which was not very good, but still fun that they made a movie. And I hear they're making a Max Payne remake entirely. So it should be like
cool.
next gen, using Unreal Engine 5 or something. I forget who's
hadn't
doing
heard
it.
About that. That's cool.
I don't know who's doing it. I don't know if it's like Remedy or someone else or whatever, but it is, we probably won't see it for years, but I was super hyped. I'm like, that it would replay. I think there's even an iOS version of Max Payne for a few dollars or something.
That wouldn't surprise me.
But I don't do mobile stuff, but big fan of Max Payne, was really left a big impression on me with the story and the action. And it's just been a favorite ever since. So
there was also a really cool scene. I think that was in the first Max Payne, where it was like almost like fever dreamy thing. I think it was Max had been drugged or something, and they break the fourth wall where like you pick up a phone, and it's like in this dream sequence of the wife being killed, which happens in the beginning. You pick up the phone, and they're like, "You're in a game, Max." It's like, what the heck's happening?
Yeah,
really
that's
cool.
in the first one. There's a couple of fever like dream sequences where you're running in the dark, and then there's bloody paths, and I mean, it's a dark game. Like, it's really a game for adults. Although at that point, I'd played a lot of violent stuff. I don't know what that says about me, but I feel fine, but yeah, I mean, now actually, more I think about it, it really was an intense game. Yeah, your wife gets killed, I think, and your kid by like drug addicts, and that's what spurs off the story. And
Hmm.
really finding the source of the drug leads to all this corporate corruption and distribution of illegal drugs or something like that. And
Hmm.
Max taking them all out at the end. Yeah, cool game, cool series. Number two wasn't as good. Like I would happily skip it, other than maybe a few set pieces. Three was a lot of fun, besides the poor Mac port. Um,
I don't know. I think number two had its value, and I would definitely recommend it if people haven't tried it. But I agree that the first one was better.
well, okay, here's what I mean about number two. Story wise, it's great. It's really
Mm.
like intensely personal about Max and Mona, and really goes into like their journey in history, or not necessarily history, but their relationship, I guess, if that's probably the best word. And
Yeah.
that part is well done. But I didn't like the well, for one, they made Max look totally different. Funny enough, he actually looks like a completely different character in every game. So there is that one.
Yeah, I think that's intentional in the third one, but yeah.
I think so.
Mm.
But the visuals were a little weird. The shooting just somehow wasn't quite as crisp, even though they added a couple things like a
Mm.
speed reload and a bullet time or something. But I don't know. They changed a couple systems, and the visuals, the levels weren't quite as fun for me either. A lot of
Right.
indoors and cramped corridors and offices, and but the story was great. The story was just as well written and really intense. And I remember it had I think it has a secret ending, if I recall. There's like the normal ending,
Mm.
which is basically bad and tragic, and then there's some sort of alternate secret ending, which is like nicer.
Didn't
Um,
know that, but yeah.
yeah, I think
I
the
mean, when
default
I think
ending,
back
yeah,
when I think back to Max Payne 2, I honestly can't remember any about like how it felt to play. I just remember like good story. It was basically Max Payne
that's
1, but new story.
mostly all I recall about it. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But that's
Okay.
that's mine.
Nice. So the second game I'd like to bring up is Gothic 2, which I've actually been replaying a bit of fairly recently. Um, and as I mentioned before, it's part of a series, but I'm picking two specifically. With Gothic, I'll say that number one and two are similar games, and I can recommend both of them. Number three is a very different game that I don't necessarily recommend. It at least is different enough to where liking one and two doesn't necessarily mean you like three.
Uh huh.
And number four doesn't exist. I mean, they made one they call Gothic 4, but I refuse to acknowledge it because it's crap. But they're remaking the first one, actually. When I
Oh,
say they, I don't necessarily mean the original studio. A new studio is remaking the first one. So there's that as well. But Gothic 2 is my pick because it's the one I played the first when I got introduced to the series, so it has a special place in my heart for that reason. And I also think it has some extremely memorable characters and events. And it also just expands everything that was set up by the first game. As for Mac support, none of the Gothic games ever had native Mac support. But you can again play these through boot camp or parallels or whatever because they're fairly old, simple games, simple by modern standards.
right.
Um, and the Gothic 2 has what I think is extremely fascinating, a Mac source port, where people in the community took the engine of Gothic and
Oh,
re-implemented a Mac version. So you can get totally native Apple Silicon native even Gothic 2 running on Macs, which is just incredible. Awesome work by the community.
oh, that's very interesting.
Um, mhm. But yeah, Gothic 2. It's an RPG, an action RPG, I guess you would call it. And it follows the nameless hero who is sent out by the fire mage Sardas to warn the king's men, the paladins, about dragons coming and the armies of evil that follow the dragons. Story wise, it is fairly generic. It's just fantasy plot number 7, right? Of the 10 fantasy plots that exist.
Sure. Yeah.
um, but it's special because one thing is having a generic plot, but again, presentation matters, and it's done in a nice way, I think. Um, it's also a case of a game that makes you feel like you grow a lot. One of the very first things you do when you leave Sardis' tower is you get to a farm, And if you're like very goal oriented, you don't think much about side quests. You might just think, oh, I'll just go straight to the city and talk to the paladins and go dragons. Um,
Hmm.
but if you try that, the guards will be like, okay, who are you? Why are you trying to get into the city? No, I don't know you. You look like a convict because you are an ex-convict in the game.
Right.
Um, they don't explicitly say if you were guilty or not. They're just like you came from the prison colonies. Make up your own backstory if you actually did it or not. Um, but the guards, we're not letting you in. You're not a citizen. You don't right. And you're like, okay, what do I do? And you get a job at the farm as a farmhand picking turnips. Right, that's what you do. And I love that. I love that like humble beginnings. I'm just a farmhand picking turnips kind of thing. Right. There's other ways of getting into the city as well, by the way, because the game does allow you to do all sorts of things. You can find an alternative. You can like swim into the like out in the ocean, get through the harbor that way, and as long as you're in there, you might be able to like find work from within the city, and then you'll be a citizen, and the guards will do okay, whatever. Um,
Nice.
or you can like so if you have the expansion, there's like a pirate you can assist in getting into the city as well. Knight of the Raven is the expansion. If you buy it on Steam today, you get like the gold version, which has the expansion built in. You can also like buy a pass from a traveling merchant who's like, just tell them you're with me and use this pass again. So there's all sorts of options for any type of quest in the game. You can
Nice.
tackle it in many ways, but I just love that you're like, I'm just a farmhand. I struggle beating even like a young wolf called like an enemy titled young wolf. I can barely beat a fucking young wolf. Um, but then late in the game, you're just like, I'm defeating the undead dragon, and I'm so powerful. It
Right.
really has a good progression. Unlike a lot of modern RPGs, like the Elder Scrolls, there's absolutely no level scaling. If a monster looks big and scary, be scared of it,
Right.
right? And I think that's great. But it also gives you so many fun tools to fight things that might actually be a little bit beyond your current level. Um, like there's a finite amount of spell scrolls in the entire game.
Oh
Once
wow.
it's used, it's gone, right?
Interesting.
So that means that they can make them intensely powerful because you get one or
Right.
however many there are, right? And last I tried the game, I got this scroll called Shrink Monster, I think it was called. And there was this really big mountain troll, and I could wait and level up a bunch and then take him on. But I decided I'm just going to use my powerful Shrink Monster scroll, and if it doesn't work, I'll just reload or something.
Right.
And before this, like he hit me, and I was flung 7 feet back and almost dead once. Right? I use Shrink Monster. He becomes incredibly tiny, like centimeters tall. All his sounds change, so instead of going "war," he goes "me." It's hilarious. And his hits they do 1% of my hit points. And I just stab him once with my sword, and he goes me, and he's dead. Like
That's
that's one
brilliant.
scroll is incredible, but I think there's just like one or two in the entire game. So this, yeah,
Right.
really awesome risk versus reward type thing. And then you get a fixed amount of XP for beating all the monsters. So high level enemies, you still get a big reward even if you're low level. You get all the things. And yeah, it's awesome. And there's just it's one of those games that aren't big in scale but big in content. Um,
Hmm.
all the areas will just have a bunch of things to do, even if the areas aren't very big. It doesn't matter because you can do so much in such a little space, and I think that's really good in game design as well, personally. And it also does a cool thing with chapters, where as you progress the main story, it'll like show a screen every now and then going like chapter 2 or chapter 3 or whatnot. And when that happens, you want to go back and revisit the areas you're like, oh, I'm pretty sure I've finished everything in this area, because the world changes as you progress through the main story.
Uh,
And the whole thing is like this orc invasion is coming and stuff. So when you reach like I think it's chapter 3 or chapter 4, all the big scary enemies that you are warning people about start being in the territories that were usually or used to be lower level areas. And all the characters there aren't necessarily prepared and stuff. Also depends on your choices and stuff. So they'll start having quests, new quests that are like, oh shit, there's a fucking troll here, help me out or whatever. Um, There's this really fun like evolution of the world happening alongside everything else. So yeah, I
That
can
is
highly
impressive
recommend
for
that.
an older game
Hmm.
to do all that, but it also reminds me of around that era, that maybe early 2000s ish era or around then. Games were very ambitious in a way
Yes.
that unfortunately games rarely are today, if almost never.
Hmm.
Games like the Thief games, the original Deus Ex games, various RPGs,
Definitely.
like that added like part sim elements to their games, and like choices actually mattered, and you actually had like multiple options for quests or confrontations or whatever.
Yeah, I think that there's
Yeah,
a big level of trust in the players to figure out the options rather than giving them the options.
yeah,
That I don't want to say like the entire industry, but a large part of the games industry has forgotten. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's good that there are a lot of games that appeal to a wider audience. But I also think it would be a shame if we didn't have any games that appeal to that smaller audience that just really wants something that just we expect you to figure these things out yourself. Not being like so vague that it's impossible to figure it out within the confines of the game, but giving you the information without screaming the information at you.
yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that, and it leads me nicely to my next game. I actually can't decide. They're both on
Sure.
my list. They both start with D.
Ooh.
uh,
Dance Dance Revolution.
let's go.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to talk about Dishonored instead of Deus Ex, even though
Hmm.
if I had to pick one game of all time, it's probably Deus Ex, or at least series, because I'm in love with the series. But what we were just talking about reminds me a little more of Dishonored, which is from Arcane Studios. There's Dishonored 1, 2, and there's a third sequel slash standalone expansion, Death of the Outsider,
Yeah.
which I don't think was very good personally, but I've played them all. Um, but the studio is known for making these more immersive sim type games, embodying a lot of the elements you're talking about. Not their latest games like Deathloop, I wasn't a fan of. The other upcoming Redfall, frankly, looks nothing like what they're known for. It just looks like a
Hmm.
weird sort of generic looter shooter live service game. Anyway, not a fan. But Dishonored's super cool. It's first person. You play like a you could say you play an assassin, but that's an oversimplification because really you're a like the guard of the queen or the empress, but she gets murdered, then you're framed for it, and all this stuff. And the visual style of the game, once again, is very compelling, really cool. It's hard. I can't really describe the visuals. It's like, oh, this might look like Call of Duty, or that might look like Borderlands, or whatever. There's something about Dishonored I can't
I
quite
mean,
place, but it's
I
super
used to
cool.
always say it looks like an oil painting in motion.
Yes,
So yeah.
that's a good way of putting it. It's impressive, very visually. Even the first game, which is a little dated now, the second game isn't like blew me away. Even today, I think it's like kind of a masterpiece.
Hmm.
So right off the bat, the story's cool. Again, sort of this. I like games that maybe you start in one position, then they put you in another. Like, oh, you're the guard of the empress. You're high up. You have wealth and power and connections, and then suddenly overnight, or in one moment, everything changes
Hmm.
and then you're framed and on the run. And it does this all in first person, not in some cutscene. You're
Hmm.
like lounging with the Empress or guarding her or whatever, like she's having tea. And then like this like shadowy assassin teleports in and uses some magic to bind you or does something to slip by you and kill the Empress and leave.
Hmm.
So it's all like very visceral and in your face and really, really cool. Um, but it's mostly a stealth game, a stealth action game. But what's cool is you also have a lot of choices. You can be lethal, you can be non-lethal, you can avoid combat. You can let people live or die or avoid them. There's little side quests to do. The world's very well realized, story's compelling, the action is super cool. The stealth is really satisfying. You can level up powers as you go along. You come in contact with the outsider, who's this unknown entity from the void, but helps give you powers like short range teleportation, or like extra cloaking, or I forget. There's a whole bunch of powers you can choose. But what's really fun about the game is it's again this idea that it's really up to the player to progress, and I think you can turn on stuff like arrows and trackers and this and that, but I turned all that off just to play the game and
Hmm.
rely more on observation and listening to people talk, maybe finding notes because there's a lot of what do you call it, like scavenging or rifling around in the game. but
Mhm.
it's really fun because the world's super detailed. Every room and street and place you go in is basically like filled with stuff. Like, oh, this
Mhm.
feels lived in or um, realized, I guess is the word. It's not like full of empty rooms and uninteresting things. It's fun to poke around. And you can
Mhm.
find secrets and hidden caches and all this kind of stuff. But I found I can't find too much to criticize about the game other than maybe it's a little gray.
Mhm.
But visually very impressive. Combat's really fun. You can engage in like direct confrontation, melee combat and stuff. You also have like a pistol and a crossbow, I think. But you're not really supposed to do that at least for any length of time because like alarms sound, more guards come, you have to run away.
Mhm.
Um, but they give you like a real Swiss Army knife of tools. You can build, craft, find all manner of traps and tripwires and bombs and like spikes. And I think there's maybe sleep darts. They just give you this whole like sandbox of toys to play in and a really cool level to a world to play in with a pretty decent AI.
Mhm.
And also a very compelling story. And it's just really fun to explore, to play. The story ratchets up to where I think to the point you end up figuring out the imposter, and I think there's something to do with a fake king or emperor or something. And you
Yeah.
do end up finding the assassin,
Mhm.
but it's there's someone else behind him who's pulling his strings, and it's like the story isn't just like generic.
Mhm.
It has some interesting plot twists and turns, and you can directly impact the story.
Yeah.
Okay, I can't think of one criticism. In that, in some games do this. The what is it called? The Metro series does this too, and I don't appreciate it. It has like a hidden karma system where if you kill a certain amount of people, you just die at the end of the game automatically. It's just like, well, you died because you were bad, but if you were non-lethal enough, then you live. I'm not a fan of that personally.
I
I'd rather
actually agree. I disagree entirely. I think that's good because what they're doing. I mean, you call it a hidden karma system, but it's not. It's not that hidden. I would say. I would say it's more organic, because characters throughout the game does comment on and indicate uh, you are becoming the assassin that you were framed to be, and all these kind of things
right,
if you act badly. So the game does sort of inform you through itself. It doesn't give you a number going like -50 goodness.
right.
But there are characters that comment on you both, if you're being stealthy and stuff. You might overhear people talking about you, but also the boatman who takes you to your next missions and stuff will comment. And
Yep.
I do think the game informs you enough in that sense that there is a form of repercussion to your actions.
No, that to be fair, you're right. That complaint was more levied at Metro, where it is much more hidden beyond an ominous like dong sound. But to
Right.
me, that's mostly nonsensical. Like, anyway, I don't want to get into that. That's a totally different game, and we've talked about Metro on the podcast before a year or two back.
Mm.
This game's it is better. It's a lot more organic, and it's not like you die in the game. You finish the game. There's an epilogue where it's like, well, since darn, I forget his name of character. Like, well, he killed too many
Corvo?
guards.
Corvo.
Corvo, yeah, like, well, he killed one too many guards, slit one too many throats, and chaos descended on the city. That's all. I would rather have an ending like that, but then randomly it's inserted like, well, he died in the chaos or something. It's just like
Mm.
that. It felt like a weird side note in a game that was otherwise very detailed and meticulous.
Right.
Like I don't mind dying. I mind the manner in which it was presented. That's what
Right.
bugged me.
Sure.
It was just
That
this odd little side note.
I can
Um,
get behind that as a criticism.
that was
Sure.
just a little weird. Otherwise, cool game. So you can, and there's also multiple endings, and not all of them are. It's not like black and white. Some of them are more also shades of gray.
Yeah.
I remember being shocked at that. Actually, the boatman in the final mission, he
Hmm.
did turn on me. He rang his
Yeah.
alarm bell, and it was like basically "F you, you murderous bastard" or something, and rode off. I
Hmm.
mean, um, how do I say this? Much to my thinking back now, much to my what's the word? Anyway, as he rode off, I was so shocked and angry, I shot him in the back.
Oh.
And then I'm like, well, I guess I'm just proving him right.
Yep.
But he did just trip the alarm in the entire island. And I am here trying to like save the nation against all the evil imposters. So it's like, come on, man. Anyway,
Could you
I
actually
still,
shoot him though? Like, did he
Mhm.
actually die? Okay,
Oh, he
that's
dies.
wild.
He tumbles over in his boat and the boat just drifts.
I mean, that's really cool. I would have thought at that point he was effectively like a cutscene, just bullets would fly through him or whatever. That's
But
cool.
I distinctly remember this moment of shock where he's like, screw
Mhm.
you, pal. So I was overly murdery, and I did get the bad ending. That's probably why I'm complaining. Um, but super cool game, and Dishonored 2 ratchets up even further. The story's crazier, and you can pick to play as your daughter Emily or
Mhm.
Corvo. I chose Emily in my playthrough because I just came fresh off playing Dishonored 1. I didn't want to play the same character. And she has her
Right.
own set of unique powers, and of course, totally different voice lines and story beats. In the world, it's incredibly detailed, and it's even semi-open world in some parts, like like parts of the city to roam around, and it's just very impressive game visually, stylistically. Maybe those two are the same thing. The story's great, voice acting is
Mhm.
great, the combat's fun, the stealth's fun. It's rewarding to make different choices and have them be impactful. Oh, I've been going on a little long about these games, but I will be remiss if I don't mention their level design, which
Mhm.
is really what the studio is
Mhm.
known for. They have insane level design. Just really creative, really in depth, multiple routes everywhere, a lot of verticality. Um, Clever nooks and crannies, just a high detail of the world, which makes exploring actually fun and different routes actually feel different. Not just like, well, I picked door A or B and we went to the same place. It's like
Yeah.
you usually end up on vastly different areas or discovering, new NPCs or side quests or hidden loot, or it's really well done.
Yeah.
Um, and they also did the level design for the much maligned Wolfenstein Youngblood game, which, to be fair, it was nothing like the previous Wolfensteins. But I played it co-op with a partner, not a partner, a buddy, which was the only way, in my opinion, the game was any good. But the
Mm.
level design was noticeably fantastic. I'm like, this reminds me of Dishonored a bit, and I looked it up. I'm like, oh, Arcane did the level design for this game. Nothing else. They didn't design the gameplay or the story or whatever, just the level
Mm.
design. And I'm like, this is really good. It was really fun to fight in these creative areas. So
I actually think I've only ever tried like two Wolfenstein games. Like Return to Castle Wolfenstein. I've definitely played that one. I think I might have played Wolfenstein 3D, but I'm not sure. And then I definitely played like the first of the new ones. Don't know what they were called.
New Colossus is the second one, but
Hmm.
the first one is also like New something or Colossus. They share like half the same name, so it's
Yeah,
confusing.
it's difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. But fan of that. Anyway, big fan of
Mm.
Arcane. I am watching their upcoming game Redfall closely, but I'm a little dubious based on just trailers. I got to really check out the game. It's also $70, which games are going up, and it's kind of like, oh, plus tax,
Mhm.
it's like 75. It's like, oh, games are getting pricey. That's a different discussion. But
Yeah.
anyway, big fan of Arcane. I think Dishonored 1 or 2 are super cool. No Mac ports, but you can play both through, I think, crossover parallels.
Mhm.
There's guides on how to set it up and run them. I played it in boot camp, but I think they both hold up as like immersive sims with cool, like, not medieval, but like it's almost steampunky, I guess. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'll talk about this game a little more because just talk about how brilliant one of the levels is in the first one. So it's the only level in the whole game. The game's like linear in a sense because the missions progress 1 through 10 or whatever. But it's Lady Boyle's party or birthday party. It's the level. So it's about three ladies or sisters, and you go to this ball party, and it's not like you have to infiltrate your way in, but that's pretty easy. But once you get to the party, your objective's actually randomized each time you play, so it's different, and you have to discover one of these three ladies who's plotting something or the other.
Mm.
And it takes quite a while. You have to snoop around, talk to guests, act cool, blend in, poke through rooms, overhear like scandals and affairs, and just. But the objective's actually randomized, so if you play it again, it's not the same thing. It's a different lady with like
Mhm.
in a different place doing something. It's brilliant. It's super cool. It's still talked about today as like a standout design. And same thing in Lava. The second game, I think it's that. What's it called? Oh my god, Clockwork Mansion. Absolutely bonkers. The entire level actually just moves around all the time,
Mhm.
like insane. Never seen anything like it before or since. It's just masterful. Really, really fun to play in.
It's definitely cool. Yeah. Well, yeah. So next on my list, I'm gonna talk about like Final Fantasy X. Obviously, there's a lot of Final Fantasy games out there.
Mm.
The 16th one is in production as we speak. Um, I say the 16th. There's like way more than those. Yeah, because they also have 10.2 and like 13.2 and all that. But
Right, right.
10, um, I played it on PS2 ages ago. I don't know when it came out, like 2004 or something. Um, and I loved it from the beginning. It has like an HD remaster thing. that last I checked, you could make it run through crossover, but it ran at like 10 frames per second on a powerful Mac. I don't know about running it through something like Parallels or something. Might work. Um, but it's an awesome game. And it looks just stunning, especially for its time. If you played Final Fantasy X on the PS2 when that game came out initially, holy damn, that looked good. Um, and I think in part it was like the pre-rendered cutscenes, honestly, because they could do all that offline, but they
Right.
did it in such a way that it didn't feel drastically more um, drastically different to the actual game. Like it did, but the gap was small enough that you still felt everything connected nicely, right?
Right.
But it looked so good that the way your mental processing of it all, the pre-rendered cutscenes and the actual gameplay was tight enough, but good enough that the like aesthetics of the cutscenes sort of bled into the way you view everything else. So when you think of a specific character, you see them in like the way they look in the cutscene, even when you look at the non-cutscene version. At least that's
Right.
like how I do it in my head, and it's
Sure.
great. Um, a criticism of the game is that it had a lot of mechanics that were maybe overused, maybe just not that interesting. Like a lot of people thought Blitzball. I don't know if you know like Final Fantasy X, but Blitzball was this
A
like
little bit.
in-game sports thing, and it was perhaps a bit dull. And like to get the best weapon for one of the characters, you had to like become the Blitzball World Championship team or something, and you had to play like 1,000 matches or something ridiculous, right? I kind of enjoyed Blitzball in kind of like a weird, I'm fucking insane. I know this is terrible, but I like it anyway kind of way.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's not a complex game. It's not difficult. It's not interesting mechanically. It's basically like I have the ball, I swim to the goal, I hit the shoot button. So yeah, obviously Final Fantasy being a JRPG series, I assume most gamers listening to this will know of the franchise as a whole. Maybe not 10 specifically, but 10 was the first one that went full on 3D, fully model 3D everything, um, and
Nice.
even for that like first attempt at that awesome game, um, as well as a lot of other games on my list, the standout thing to me for Final Fantasy X is the story and the characters, because that's something that really puts a game in your memory, right? It can be incredibly good for gameplay and all these other things, but a game having amazing story and amazing characters really makes it stick with you, at least to me. Um, and the story of Titus and Yuna and Lulu and Riku and all these other characters, it's in there permanently and just part of my whole, yeah. I have a lot of nostalgia for it and I experience it to a great degree. The gameplay itself, classic turn-based fighty action game in the
Right.
RPG sense. Either you like it or you don't, I guess. I thought it was nice. I thought a lot of the encounters were, um, had a lot of fun strategy that you could do to them. I like the summon system and the like animations and character of the summons. They all felt fun and unique, and I like them. Um, the cloister trials, which was like these little puzzles that were included, sprinkled out throughout the game, that you would solve to get your summons. I thought a lot of those were a bit annoying to solve,
Mm.
in part because they were like, I understand what I'm supposed to do at this point, but it's just such a hassle to go through the steps of doing it. And that's like the most annoying state a puzzle can be in, because you sit there for like 5 minutes feeling I've already solved this. I'm just putting the pieces together, and it's a
Right.
hassle.
Yeah.
Um, and even like the puzzles themselves weren't that interesting. They were, yeah, some of them were okay, but most of them I didn't like. Um, and it was a very touching story, and so something people make fun of every now and then on the internet is the scene where Titus laughs, because it is a goofy laugh that just it sounds fake. But I think what some people forget when they make fun of that scene is that it's supposed to be fake. right? The whole point of that scene is we put on a smile because we're supposed to be the heroes of these people who are losing hope. They're supposed to look at us and regain some of that hope. So we put on a fake smile even when we're not happy. So they see that smile. So that the whole point of that laugh is that it is fake, right?
Right.
And I'm not saying like everyone who makes fun of it misses that point because it still sounds goofy and it's still fun to use in that way.
Right. Right.
But it is not a problem that it sounds goofy. It's actually good, and I love it.
Right. It's intentional. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
also just the music of the Final Fantasy series as a whole, but also perhaps because of the nostalgia, especially Final Fantasy X. Oh, the music is good. There is a so Final Fantasy X especially does this very interesting thing where it has like heavy metal-ish rock music at parts, and then this like soft, almost classical like piano style or orchestral scores throughout the other parts. It's a really interesting mix that it's separated in like the space you're in. So if you're in like Sanakand, which is separate from the world you're normally in, kinda, um, it has these like metally bits. And if you're in Spira, the more magic-oriented world, it has the classical orchestral sounds. But they mix together really nicely and just generate this awesome atmosphere. And then there's this song that plays when spoilers, obviously, because there's a lot of spoilers throughout these conversations. But Titus and Yuna like acknowledge that they're in love with each other, and just Sutsukidane, isn't it wonderful tonight, or something like that. Japanese to English, I think that's what
Right.
it's called. Plays, and it's a beautiful song.
You know, I've heard like Eunice Lullaby and stuff like that because I haven't been commenting, but I've never played a Final Fantasy game, but I've heard a
Right.
lot about them. I've listened to a lot of the music. I've read some of the stories, especially Titus and Yuna, because they are cool characters. So it's fun having like listening to you like really pour your energy into this conversation,
Yeah.
and the really how heartfelt and passionate you are about the story and everything about that.
Mhm.
I never got into it mostly because I don't like JRPG combat,
Right. Yeah. The,
but
the combat is really an either you're into it or you're not.
yeah, but I like their worlds. I like their over the top style and animations and outfits and
Mhm.
yeah, all these like the stories tend to be really like heroic and uplifting and emotional and like I like that stuff. It's just
Mhm.
it so happens I don't like the combat, so I never got into them. But I think it's a really cool series, and I can understand why it's so popular and so long running. You know,
Mhm.
from whenever it started, even as you said, a new one's being developed as we speak. So
Yeah, I mean, the interesting point about that is like the Final Fantasy games, even when they're numerically ordered, they're not in the same universe, they're not in the same worlds, they're not the same characters, they are completely independent stories.
right.
So people again might probably have knowledge of the series, but you don't need to have played 1 through 9 to play Final Fantasy X. Um, they do sometimes do direct sequels, which is why they have like 10-2 and 13-2 and stuff like that. But they are very independent. They share like commonalities, like chocobos exist in a lot of them. These like big bird creatures that are cute.
Right.
Um, and there's like the potions are called the same things and stuff like that. But aside from that, they're totally independent. I can also recommend Final Fantasy 15, especially if you're not into the JRPG combat systems, because that's more traditional action combat system.
Is that the MMO or that's 14
No, the
online?
14 is the MMO.
Okay. All
Also,
right.
I think 11 was an MMO, but yeah.
Right.
But
Lily
15 is
plays it,
more.
so she'll probably
Cool.
talk about it if we can pull her out of pull her out of the military, pull her
Yeah.
off being super busy in the army,
Mhm.
get her back on the
But
show.
I can also recommend 15 because it has a very different vibe. 15 is like a very cozy game that's just like a lot of dark things happen throughout it, but it just feels like you're just on a trip with some nice friends a lot of the time, and it's really cozy and cool.
Nice,
But yeah, 10 is my ultimate favorite, probably due in
nice.
large part to nostalgia.
Yeah, that's fair. A number of these on my list, and one of the ones I'm going to talk about next. I only have time for one more because I got to run for
Yeah,
a birthday party.
we are
This
also
is
reaching our normal episode
We
length.
are, but this is super fun. I just want to talk about these games all day because they are my favorite games.
Hmm.
As I ran a little long with the Dishonored portions.
Hmm.
I'm gonna talk about Escape Velocity, a
Oh,
little
I haven't heard of that
game
one.
from 1996 by Ambrosia Software. 27 years old now. Good lord. When did I even play this? Must have been like 10 or 11 when I first played it. My brother got it. It's a shareware game. Ambrosia was a Mac only, for the most part, shareware company. Well, actually, Sea Velocity was Mac only. The series is very successful. Later turned into a trilogy, and the third game, which is arguably the best of the series, also got a Windows port because it was so successful. Apparently, a lot of PC users clamored for it, and they're like, "Okay, they released one." But I was a huge Ambrosia Software fan. Their demos came on like every Mac Addict magazine disc. I was always installing them, playing them, buying some of them. Or my brothers did. My older brother, who likes gaming but rarely has time for it because he has a big family and everything.
Mhm.
But this is one of his all-time favorites. So it's like a 2D top-down game, set in space, and it's just a very open-ended space adventure. And speaking of humble beginnings, you start as just this tiny little shuttle on the screen. It's literally like this almost like little white box. You can barely see it. You got a little like puny laser, pew pew.
Mm.
You're not supposed to fight anything, and you have to start out taking basic jobs. You got to shuttle cargo, people. Just really like you open up a really nice, cool star map that looks like something you could imagine in astronomy or something with planets and Earth and Tau Ceti. I don't know how to say that. And all these other names. They use real ones and a bunch of fake ones. I think later.
Mhm.
Um, so graphical, like if I went back and played it today, I probably wouldn't enjoy it that much. But for its time and how much I played it, it's the first game that really got me into space stuff and loving like sci-fi. Even though the game is reasonably grounded, there's only a little sci-fi in it, not like heavy sci-fi. It's more like straightforward. But the third game gets a little sci-fi. There's a bunch of aliens and stuff.
Mm.
The first one's just humans have spread amongst the stars. There's different factions like the Federation and the Rebels, and there's various merchant groups, and you can open-endedly join any of these and follow their whole storyline throughout the whole game. It's like a full game basically, but in that storyline.
Mm.
Joining the Federation and suppressing the rebels, or vice versa to overthrow them, or you can run around and be a space pirate, which is what I usually did.
So does it actually have like an end story point, or is it?
Yeah, the game doesn't truly end; it remains open-ended, but the story does have a definitive ending, and it does permanently change the galaxy as well.
Mm.
Like ownerships of planets will change, systems will get destroyed, new tech becomes available, and stuff like that. It was really fun. And there's that sense of progression. You work way up. Oh, you buy a new ship, and this one's a little better, and maybe do a little combat, and you can fight off raiders or pirates, or still go join one of the factions and like do their missions. And
Mm.
it had no voice acting or anything. Simple sound effects. A lot of like pop-up text boxes. Like you could go and land on a planet, and then like go to the bar and hear like rumors, or go to the job posting board, or if it was a faction based, there would be a button for them or whatever. And if you were in with them, you could get there. But it also had a reputation system. So if you joined the rebels, well, the Federation people hated you and would attack you on sight and stuff, for example. If you pirated too much, you would have like bounties put on your head and this kind of stuff. So you might need to stick to the fringes. But actually had, well, at least for the time, what I recall being quite good storylines, like interesting.
Mm.
And you could name your character, but the story actually had, named characters you interacted with or even had relationships with. And, friends came and went. And it was this whole epic struggle. But you could also just, plink around the galaxy and do trade routes or fight some bounties or whatever. But you could go explore out in the way fringes too and find like mysterious, like alien unidentified ships. And first game was pretty basic. Second game, I think, was honestly terrible. I
Oh,
wouldn't
okay.
play it. I wouldn't recommend it. It was the same game in the sense of, well, the same top down game. You have a spaceship and it's the world and the factions, but the
Mm.
stories were weird. The ships were weird. The combat was weird. The factions were compelling. Everything about it was weird. My brother and I hated it. We tried it
Mm.
out and was like, ugh. Then later they released EV Nova many years later, which the graphics were much more like modern. Oh, modern, haha.
Mhm.
But modern by that standards, they were kind of like 3D. They had real depth to it instead of being flat. There was
Mm.
actually some like particle effects to things. Lasers and missiles looked really cool, and just your thrusters looked cool. And it had 6 distinct storylines, and also like again really good writing. Each game also had a whole plugin system, so the community would write plugins,
Oh, that's
new
cool.
ships, new models, new storylines, and some of them were really epic, like as big as the game itself. And I remember downloading and using a number of them and having like an entirely new game experience, or maybe just a whole another epic campaign with like cool custom ships and weapons. And it just really captured why it's a favorite is because it really captured my imagination. I love that sense of space, and I still do. Like I just finished binge watching The Expanse TV show based on the books. Like I just get this sense of like wonder, discovery, and yearning when I watch these things or play these kinds of games. Like I just really like it. And that was the first game that kind of like awoke that in me. Like, oh, not that I'm like a stargazer or anything like that, but I just love this idea of like, oh, going out into the stars, one day is like, I guess I don't have dreams of, being an astronaut or taking a spacewalk, although that'd be hella cool. But yeah, it's a fun game. Nowadays, it probably doesn't hold up. Definitely a little simplistic. You could definitely like kind of game the game by figuring out certain trade routes and making tons of money and this and that.
But it sounds like a lot of the appeal of this game might exist in something like Elite Dangerous. I don't know if that's
Yes.
fair, but
No, later they made games like Elite Dangerous and what was
that's
it?
by the same people.
No, not they. I mean, like in this idea.
Right,
What was
I
it called?
see.
Freelancer or something?
Yeah, there was a game.
Privateer. There was a bunch of these games that, like, when I heard about them, I remember talking to my brother, like, this game sounds like Escape Velocity, but in full 3D, and it's all,
Yeah.
And I never ended up getting into them. Well, funny enough, I did buy Elite Dangerous when I had a Mac port. I failed to play it, and then they removed Mac support. So I
Right.
never got into the game.
I think you can still play the Mac version, but you can't interact with the other players, and it's like this semi-online thing, and you can't enjoy any of that. And a lot of them, like things they added along the way, you don't get on the Mac version, stuff like that. And they've added
but you're
a
not
lot of
wrong.
things.
That it's that idea, but go back like 20 years and imagine how they might make it. Well, it's just flat in 2D and much more simplistic. But yeah, it's that sense of just open-ended sandbox space. Build up your ship. Customize your weapons and build a fleet. You could get escorts in this game too, Escape Velocity, and you could run around with you could disable other ships, then board them. And if you had enough like crew and rating, you could actually capture them, and then they were like your little vassal. So you could assemble this whole like fleet going with you. Usually, you could only get small ships because like the enemy factions had like enormous like mothership space, not motherships, but like capital ships, and they could just like annihilate your little fleet if you weren't careful and stuff like that.
Have you ever tried FTL, Faster Than Light?
Yes, I have. Reasonably big fan of that.
The boarding your ship thing, you made me think of that. That's also a really cool game. It does have a Mac version as well. That's like this
it's
2D
a great game.
Space thing, yeah.
It's my go-to travel game, actually. I think I still have it installed on my laptop. Like, it's easy to play on a bus, on a plane, on a train, whatever. And, good save point. Yeah. Space is fun, and yeah, that's Escape Velocity. Ambrosia went out of business, unfortunately, over time. Honestly, most of the games are really nostalgic, and I adore Frazzle's Wand, Pillars of Garendel. They had like weird takes on Pong and Centipede, but like bizarre, like Alice in Wonderland style takes and visuals and graphics. It was just, they made a lot of weird games, and they published some that weren't developed by them, but other people. But anyway, last note, a group they kickstarted, I think last year. It's like a remake of the second game, the one I said I hated. But it's called Cosmic Frontier Override. Because the second game is called Eevee Override. So the license isn't available. What's his name? Matt Walsh was the guy who developed the original game, and Ambrosia published it. For some reason, he never let the license go. There was like clamor for a remake or a sequel of the games, but it never happened. Anyway, these guys somehow have some kind of licensing. They raised about what looks like £39,000, around 1,000 backers. So it's being developed slowly, but they're doing some sort of more, as modern as these kind of games can be, remake called Cosmic Frontier. So if you're interested, go check it out. It's on Kickstarter. I don't know if there's a late back or anything, but you can see updates. And I just peeked, and there's like a development video talking about combat and systems. And anyway, so it's underway. I didn't back it, honestly.
I mean, if it was the one in the series you didn't find particularly interesting.
That was why I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to back this. And I looked into it. I'm like, well, I'm kind of dubious. It's fully funded. It's fine. It'll come out eventually. I can check it out then, because I've been burned on a couple of these games on Steam that I have bought. Are these more like, that style, top down 2D, 3D mix or whatever.
Mhm.
and a couple of them were really cool, but ultimately never what I wanted or what I'd hoped to get out of like that style of a game. So even though they say they're remaking it, well, it's different people, it's a different time, and I'm also playing different kinds of games now. So
Yeah.
who's to say like, oh, I'll just love it? But I'm happy it's still out there, like the spirit of the game at least.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's fun. So that'll do it for this show. But we'll be back. Well, maybe not next week, but soon with more games. The next show could be us. It might be me and Ted. Hard to say. We have to juggle schedules and get out episodes. Like hopefully not months and months and months apart,
Mhm.
but whenever possible. Hopefully, at least definitely for the finale. Like or like last game. Like we could all hopefully gather like 3, 4 of us. I
Mhm.
guess technically 5 of us, so we can get Sam.
Yeah.
That would be fun. We'll see what we can, but this is our format for now. Best games of all time will be the next several shows, possibly, and
Mhm.
we will go from there. So thank you very much for your time, Casper. Loved hearing about, what was it? Longest Journey, Gothic 2, and Final Fantasy X. And
Exactly.
thank you for listening to all my games,
Mhm.
especially the Dishonored Ramble. That really stretched. Um,
Yeah, so just to reiterate yours as well, you had Escape Velocity, Dishonored, and what was your first one again?
Max Payne.
Max Payne, that's right.
I had to think in reverse also. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I picked mine out of order on my list and just bolded them like, oh, I feel like talking about these today.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as we said in the beginning, it's not necessarily an ordered list, so yeah.
No, it isn't. It isn't.
But it's super fun to like talk about these games that have meant a lot, and yeah, and recommend them to people and see what comes out of the
It is.
conversations.
It is. I love hearing the passion and emotion or the impact the game
Yeah.
had on you, whether I'll play them or not, or have played them or not. It's like, oh, this is really
Hmm.
interesting to hear about for me from your side.
Hmm.
So we'll hear more from Ted hopefully soon, and at some point Lily, and we'll go from there. So thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.